Is November 11th, 2022. Let me start by saying that I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. This information is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. Today we'll be talking about stock symbol MMTLP and what has come to be known as the double squeeze. So this is a quick take video. Hopefully it won't be too long, and it'll just focus on this one topic. Okay. So, in case you're not aware of what stock symbol MMTLP is, it represents some oil and gas assets in West Texas in something called the Oro Grande Basin. Basically, these assets are going to be spun out from a company called MetaMaterials to form another company called NextBridge Hydrocarbons. There's approximately 3.2 billion barrels of oil in the ground and a bunch of natural gas. There's a 49% revenue interest in this. It's near El Paso, Texas. There's a Marathon refinery in El Paso, Texas. There are two pipelines in the area. One's for oil and one's for natural gas. And the nice thing about Texas is that you don't need a federal lease in order to get this oil and gas. It's what's called private land in Texas. Okay? So let's get to the topic at hand. The topic at hand is what we call the double squeeze. And this has to do with stock symbol MMTLP and stock symbol MMAT, which is the parent company. Okay. So we talked a little bit about what MMTLP is. So let's go on about what the double squeeze is actually. Okay. So NextBridge Hydrocarbons is this company that's going to be spun out, and because it's going to be spun out, the law and rules require that an S1 filing be approved by the SEC. So the S1 filing has been submitted. And once the SEC approves it, then if you are an MMTLP shareholder, you will get a dividend of the new spun out company, which is called NextBridge Hydrocarbons. Now, those NextBridge Hydrocarbons shares that you will be getting will only be available from MetaMaterials. They don't exist anywhere else, and those shares are non-tradable, so they cannot be, bought and sold on exchanges. The end result of that is that shorts, if you've shorted MMTLP, or you shorted actually Torchlight Energy, which resulted in you being a short of MMTLP, shorts have to exit their MMTLP short position, right? Because those shares will cease to trade. So what that means is that, so because those shares will cease to trade, the shorts have to exit their short position. Also, shorts cannot actually deliver this non-tradable NextBridge Hydrocarbon shares, and that's another reason that that they want to get out of that position. So the brokers for the shorts will want the shorts to get out of that position. They want them to close. So as the MMTLP shorts close their positions, and to close their positions, they need to actually buy to close, because a short position is when you've sold something you don't own and you hope to buy it back sometime later on at a lower price. That means that those open short positions are shares or synthetic shares that have been sold, but they didn't come from anywhere. So therefore, they need to be bought back to be closed. Now, as the shorts close their positions, and there's all this buying of these MMTLP shares to close their position, that means that the share prices could start to rise substantially. And by substantially, we mean well above the fundamental value, right? Just due to the shorts buying, because there are a limited number of MMTLP shares, and if nobody's selling those shares to the shorts, then there's nowhere for the price to go but up. And that's what can result in squeeze number one. Now, squeeze number one was actually described in the NextBridge Hydrocarbons S1 filing. So therefore, that's where squeeze number one comes from. Now, what is squeeze number two? Well, if you experience these shares going up in price a lot, significantly, much more than their fundamental value, you might decide to sell your shares, and you might make a tidy profit from that. Now, those former MMTLP shareholders, they may want to buy the parent company, MMAT, or MetaMaterials. And they may want to buy those shares simply because, simply because it's the parent company, right? And George Pelicaris has indicated that he thinks that that the dividend for MMTLP will be very exciting for the Torchlight shareholders. And if they want, they can buy some MMAT shares, and, he wouldn't be against that. So it's possible that a lot of these former MMTLP shareholders will buy stock symbol MMAT. And currently the market price of MMAT is very, very low. And because you now have a lot of huge amounts of money coming into these new shareholders of these previous MMTLP shareholders who sold their shares, that could cause a huge demand in MMAT shares, causing the price to go up. When that price goes up, then there are a bunch of shorts in MMAT, and those shorts can become overrun. And when those shorts become overrun and they experience margin calls, they will also have to close their positions, and by closing the short positions, that means that they will have to buy to close. So with all this buying that's going on, it's quite possible that the MMAT share price may rise significantly, well above its fundamental value, and that's where squeeze number 2 comes in, right? You've got all the people who are buying MMAT from the profits of MMTLP, and you've got all the shorts that now have to cover their MMAT positions, right? So that's where squeeze number 2 comes from. So if we look at SEC filings recently, we see that there has been an S3 filing that took place on November 10th, 2022, and that is a registration under the Securities Act. Here is the S3 that is filed. Links will be provided, of course, to the SEC website. You can check this out yourself. But if you note, MetaMaterials says that they would like to one day, not immediately tomorrow, but that they may want to one day sell up to $250 million or $250 million worth of Meta shares, all right, MMAT, under the stock symbol MMAT. So to me, it sounds like they intend to sell MMAT if the share price increases substantially, right? So it seems like a perfect setup here, right? Just think about it. So we see that this S3 has been filed. We also see that there was they also announced earnings at the same time, and they had a webinar about their earnings announcement. And they talked about their earnings announcement and all that. And here's their earnings announcement. And as you can see, there's a webinar link. If you go to the webinar link, you'll see this is, here's the webinar for the earnings. And it's they go over everything in detail. And I recommend you check out the actual Q3 2022 results, either from the webinar link, or you could also check it out from Uncle Smokey's channel. He's actually done a live stream, I believe, at the time that the earnings call was being webcast, and he recorded it. So you can check it out under Uncle Smokey's site. He's done a really good job with it, I think. But in any case, this is the 2022 results. But at the end of it, we see some closing statements by Ken Rice, and he answers 2 very important questions. This is about 47 minutes and 35 seconds in from the beginning, and he talks about the S1A4 filing, or he talks about the S1 Amendment number 4 filing, and that's for MMTLP. Let's hear what he has to say.
Which is that we filed an S1 again last night, and that S1 was filed for one purpose and one purpose only. The numbers that were in the original filing, S1 is related to the spin out of the oil and gas assets. And we filed an update to the S1 with the SEC last evening to do one thing, which is to roll forward the financials that were in the previous filing to make them current, because the financials that were in the previous filing expired yesterday. So we needed to update them to the third quarter. And what we're waiting for now is 2 things. The SEC will get back to us on that filing. We don't expect anything major there. And then the last piece of the process is once the SEC declares that S1 effective, then we go with FINRA, who has to help us actually implement the spinoff itself, and the major thing that they need to do is ensure that when we do the spinoff, the trading in MMTLP ceases because the stock won't be there anymore.
So that's very interesting to hear. So they're working with FINRA to make sure that the trading in MMTLP does stop, and that MMTLP will cease to exist after that. So that's a really good sign. Let's also hear the next thing he has to say just before the end of this webinar. And that takes place about 48 minutes and 48 seconds in from the beginning. And he talks here about the S3 filing that I just described earlier.
Number two, last night as well, we filed a $250 million shelf registration statement. Now, what I'll say at the very beginning is we said in our comments that there's a likelihood that in the future we'll need to raise more money in the company. We don't need to do that this minute or even this quarter, but what we wanted to do was take advantage of the fact that our business is really growing rapidly. One of the things that sort of escapes folks at times is that we've more than trebled our revenue 21 to 22 over 21. And we did that in spite of COVID, and we're doing it in very unique areas. And so what we want to do is we want to have as many tools available to us as possible to raise capital going forward when the market conditions are right. A shelf registration for a company like ours is one of the best tools we can have. It's the most flexible. It allows us to sell stock that's pre-registered into the primary market. It also allows us in certain circumstances to sell stock into the secondary market, shares that are already issued. And what we can do in that case is we put that shelf registration up. It doesn't commit us to do anything, but it gives us 3 years to raise money in as little or as large pieces as the market makes sense for us to do. So since the fourth quarter is always a crazy busy time for us and we had capacity, we decided we would put the shelf up now. The SEC still has the right to look at it. We expect that they will. And once that's done, then we can use the shelf going forward for the next 3 years for whatever we need for future capital.
So that's very interesting.
Great. Thank you, Ken. And thank you all for joining us today. If you have any additional...
Okay, enough of that. So that was very interesting. He talked there about the S3 filing, where he doesn't intend to use it immediately, but if the stock price starts going up dramatically, then he could use it to raise additional funds to grow the company. What's this whole set of slides about? That's right. It's about this thing called the double squeeze. Well, the first part, where he talked about the S1 amendment number 4 was filed, right? And he expects the SEC to approve that sometime soon, I believe. The first part, he also mentioned he wants to work with FINRA to ensure that the MMTLP stops trading. And both of those actions help with regard to squeeze number 1. Okay, both of those actions help with regard to squeeze number 1. And I'm not the only one who noticed this, by the way. Bird Lady Roller Pigeons, of course, she noticed it immediately. She said, I'm very bullish after what Ken Rice said on the earnings call in regards to MMTLP. They're going to work with FINRA to ensure MMTLP stops trading on the record date. About time to close those short positions. So all of that has to do with making sure that the short positions must get closed, right? So they have to get closed out. That means buy to close. That means forced buying. That sounds very, very pro squeeze number 1. And also, if we look, MetaMaterials News also talked about that as well, too. They talked about how the S1 filing was only for financials, and the next step is to mark the filings as effective, and that they are going to be working with FINRA to close out MMTLP. And in that case, it will stop trading, and FINRA will also close out all shorts. So basically, MetaMaterials is going to work with FINRA to ensure that all shorts are closing out of their position in MMTLP. And that's very bullish, I think. That basically says to me that squeeze number, they're making sure that squeeze number 1 will take place because shorts will have to exit their position. It's just a given. What about squeeze number 2? Well, he also talked about preparing to sell MMAT shares if MMAT share prices increase, if those MMAT shares increase in price substantially. Sounds like he's preparing for squeeze number 2 to happen. Sounds like he expects squeeze number 2 to happen sometime when the share price will go up dramatically. And if that happens, then, that's squeeze number 2. It sounds like that's what they're into. So I happen to have made a tweet a while back, just actually not a while back, just a day or two ago. And I was thinking about this double squeeze, and I was saying, many people are saying, there's going to be a lot of many people who will become not just millionaires, I think, but multimillionaires out of MMTLP. And I think a lot of those newly made multimillionaires, they might want to invest not just a portion of their funds back into MMAT. Some of them might want to invest all of it back. And if we just get a few of those people, a few of those multimillionaires to invest, large quantities back into MMAT, it could be that they'll wind up buying more than 5% of MMAT shares, by the way. And if that happens, if you buy more than 5% of a share, you need to, you actually need to file what's called a 13D, a Form 13D with the Securities Exchange Commission that says you own more than 5%. Now, we know that there's a large short position in MMAT. So imagine if 20 plus people just said that they own 5% or more of MMAT. Well, that's over 100% of all the shares there. How can people, own more than 100% of the shares of a particular stock? Well, if the stock has been shorted out the wazoo, and there's a lot of synthetic shares out there, those people didn't ask to buy synthetic shares. They asked to buy real shares. As far as they're concerned, their shares are real. And they need to comply with the law and file a 13D. So if more than 100 people have stated that they own, if more than 100% of MetaMaterials shares have been registered with the SEC then on a 13D, do you think that might cause a double MOASS, a double mother of all short squeezes? Let's see. Okay. So I happen to have made a mistake on this number. I said it was about 16 million shares or so. Turns out that, they recently filed their Form 10Q, and in that 10Q, it said that there are 361 million shares, basically, of common stock. And if we take that, and I was using a much smaller number than 361 million shares, but if we take 361 million shares, multiply it by 5%, that means basically if you have 18 million shares or more, if you have 18,100,000 shares, you need to register with the SEC, right? And why do you need to do this? You need to file what's called a Schedule 13D. And shareholders who acquire more than 5% of the outstanding shares of that class must file beneficial owner reports on Schedule 13D, and that's a public report. And they have to keep filing that until their shareholdings drop below 5%, right? And if you click on investor.gov, which is run by the Securities Exchange Commission, by the U.S. SEC, they basically say that Schedule 13D and also 13G are called beneficial ownership reports, right? And the Schedule 13D reports the acquisition and other information. These reports have to be filed within 10 days after the purchase. So after you've purchased the shares, if you own more than 5%, you got to file the 13D. It's just by law. And if we see what, a brokerage like Interactive Brokers has to say about it, they say you got to file the 13D within 10 days according to the SEC. But if you have any updates to it, like say you decide to buy more shares, say you decide to sell some shares, whatever updates you have with that 13D, you need to file the updates promptly within 2 business days. So after the first filing, you're given 10 days. Any additional changes, meaning you buy more shares, you sell some shares, you need to disclose that within 2 business days. And if you fall under that 5% threshold, let's say you sell some shares, then you have to make one final amendment to that SEC filing of that 13D that says that you fell below that 5% mark. Now, let's say you own more than let's say that you might want to buy more than 5%. Well, if you buy 10%, now here's an issue. If you own more than 10%, you're now considered to be an insider, according to the SEC, right? And because they say that, you have a lot of shares, you have to report your transactions, and you can't actually, at that point, buy and sell whenever you want, because, there's rules on when insiders may actually do trading of their own shares. You can't trade prior to earnings reports. You can't, you can trade after the earnings reports or disclose to the public, but you can't trade prior to that, a whole bunch of things. Anyway, so insiders face a bunch of restrictions on their buying or selling, right? And these restrictions, and so the shares that insiders own are often called restricted shares. So if you own more than 10% of MMAT, which means you own about 36 million shares, then you could be an insider. Okay, and if you are an insider, your shares are restricted. I don't think there will be many of those, but there might be one or two. You never know. But just imagine if after all that MMAT buying by the MMTLP shareholders, and after all the 13Ds have been filed by, these newly minted multimillionaires. And, there are current insiders today of MMAT, like George Palikaris and I forget, Thomas Welch, I believe, so those guys are already insiders. They own a lot of shares already. And if you count up all those 13D filings, if that comes up to more than 100% of the shares issued, I don't know, it just sounds like a double MOASS to me. Anyway, so if you're new to MMTLP, I've got some videos about MMTLP. 1 year of trading is the first video you should check out. It gives you a gross overview of it, provides links to the MMTLP story and all that, and you can go off and check the other videos from there. There are some other cool videos if you're brand new to MMTLP. There's one about an FAQ. So I made an FAQ video, frequently asked questions, for MMTLP shareholders. A lot of the numbers that are actually posted about MMTLP are not correct, so the FAQ will help to clarify that in terms of like the number of shares that are available, that kind of thing. Also, if you're an old hat at trading stocks and things like that, you may have used stop losses in the past, and I have a video about how those old tricks that you have about stop losses and stuff like that, they may not work for MMTLP because you have something called an active short, right? An actively, a very active short who is trying to push down the price of your stock, and they can see your stop losses, and they will probably try to trigger your stop losses and make you sell at a loss automatically. So you might want to check that video out as well too. In either case, if you would like to find out about the S1 filings, I've got a whole bunch of videos on that. Start with the first one, which describes in detail what the next bridge hydrocarbons is, and each of the following videos, they build upon that when they assume that you know all the information in the first video. So they are progressive. The final last video on that is about the S1 amendment number 3 that was S1 amendment number 3 and S1 amendment number 4 that's been filed. So links will be provided for those. Check that out. And finally, this is the second video I have about the double squeeze. If you want, you can check out the first video, which goes into more details about how the double squeeze works and what the projected gains are from the double squeeze. So you can check that video out. Anyway, let me end by saying that I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. This information is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. I will see you on the moon. I am Market Moves. My name is Tony, and yeah, hope you have a really good weekend. Don't forget, I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. This information is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. Goodbye.